The stars burned cold in the darkness of space. Captain Taesung stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching Earth grow smaller through the viewport. 500 years. That was how long humanity had hidden behind their walls, afraid of what they might become if they stepped back into the galaxy. But the message had changed everything. 3 weeks ago, a probe had entered the Sol system. It was old, barely functioning, but its message was clear. The galaxy was dying. Something called the Velkari Swarm was consuming world after world, and the Great Galactic Coalition could not stop them. They were losing, and in their desperation they had remembered the old stories. Stories about Terra, stories about humans. Taesung remembered the day the council met to discuss the message. The Great Hall had been silent as the hologram played. An alien with feathers instead of hair spoke in broken English, her voice shaking with fear. "We know you are there. We know you chose to leave us. But please, if the old stories are true, if humans are real, we need you. We are dying." The debate had lasted for days. Some said humanity should stay hidden. They reminded everyone of the contact wars, of the millions who died, of the shame that forced Earth to seal itself away from the stars. Others argued that isolation was meant to teach them, not trap them forever. Taesung had spoken last. He was not a politician or a philosopher. He was a soldier, and he knew what it meant to hide from a fight that needed fighting. "We left because we were monsters," he had said. "We stayed away to become better. But if we hide now when people are dying, what does that make us?" The vote was close, but humanity decided to return. Now the Indomitable led a fleet of 30 ships toward the edge of Coalition space. It was not much compared to the thousands of vessels the Coalition commanded, but it was all Earth could spare. They had spent 5 centuries building weapons they hoped never to use again. Lieutenant Hei Wan sat at the pilot station, her hands dancing across the controls. She was young, barely 30, and had never seen combat. None of them had. The last war humanity fought was 500 years ago, before any of them were born. "Captain," she said, not looking up from her screens, "we're approaching the jump point." "Ready when you are," Taesung nodded. Behind him, the bridge crew worked quietly. Each person knew their job. Each person carried the weight of what they represented. They were not just a rescue mission. They were humanity's second chance. Dr. Jiwoo approached from the science station. She was older than most of the crew, with gray streaking her black hair. She had studied every file about the Coalition, every scrap of information Earth had kept from the old days. "Captain, I've been reviewing what we know about the Velkari," she said. "It's not much. The probe said they're insectoid, that they consume entire planets. But there's something wrong with the data." "Wrong how?" "The Coalition has been fighting them for 3 years. In that time, the swarm has destroyed 17 worlds. But according to the tactical reports, the Velkari don't just attack randomly. They choose their targets carefully. That suggests intelligence, not just instinct." Taesung considered this. "You think something is controlling them? I think we should be prepared for anything." The ship shuddered as it entered the jump. Space twisted around them, colors bleeding together in ways that hurt to look at. Then, with a snap that everyone felt in their bones, they were elsewhere. The border world of Talvoran hung before them, and it was burning. "Contacts," shouted the tactical officer. "Dozens of them. No, hundreds." The view screen filled with ships. They were organic, like insects grown to impossible size, all chitin and sharp edges. They swarmed around Talvoran like flies on a corpse, firing weapons that looked like streams of acid. And they were winning. The Coalition fleet was in retreat. Their ships were elegant things built for exploration and trade, now pressed into desperate combat. As Taesung watched, one of the alien vessels exploded, torn apart by 3 Velkari ships working in perfect coordination. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Coalition flagship," said the communications officer. "They're ordering us to fall back. They say this position is lost." Taesung looked at the burning world. Sensors showed millions of life signs on the surface. The Coalition was abandoning them. "Hey, One," he said quietly. "Take us in." The lieutenant turned to stare at him. "Sir, there are at least 200 enemy vessels. We have 30 ships." "I know how to count, Lieutenant. Take us in." For a moment, no one moved. Then Heywan smiled. The kind of smile that said she had been hoping he would give that exact order. Her hands flew across the controls and the Indomitable surged forward. "All ships," Taesung announced over the fleet channel. "We did not come here to watch people die. We did not leave Earth to run from our first fight. Engage at will. Show them why they told stories about us. The human fleet scattered like seeds in the wind, each ship choosing its own path into the chaos. It was not how the coalition fought. They had formations, protocols, centuries of military tradition. Humans had something else. They had 500 years of guilt to work off. The Indomitable screamed toward the nearest cluster of Valkyrie ships. HFY flew like someone possessed, spinning the massive warship through gaps that should not have existed. Weapons fired, the new railguns humanity had developed punching through chitin armor like paper. A Valkyrie vessel turned to face them, but HFY was already somewhere else. The Indomitable twisting in 3 dimensions at once. More railgun rounds tore through the insectoid ship's underbelly. "Private Donghyun, prepare your Marines," Taesung ordered. "We're going to board one of those ships. I want to know what we're fighting." In the Marine Bay, young Donghyun felt his heart hammering. He had trained for this, spent years learning how to fight in zero gravity, in toxic atmospheres, in situations no sane person would survive. But training was not the same as reality. Around him, his unit checked their weapons and armor. They were quiet, focused, scared but ready. The Indomitable shook as it matched velocity with a damaged Valkyrie ship. HFY had crippled it with surgical precision, destroying its weapons but leaving the hull intact. "Go," shouted the sergeant, and Donghyun went. The boarding pod fired like a bullet, crossing the gap between ships in seconds. It hit the Valkyrie hull with a screech of tearing metal, and the Marines poured through. What they found inside was nightmare made flesh. The corridors were not built for humanoid life. They twisted at wrong angles, dripped with strange fluids, pulsed like the inside of a living thing. And the Valkyrie themselves were worse. They looked like ants scaled up to human size, but wrong. Too many joints, too many eyes, mandibles that could shear through steel. They made sounds that bypassed the ears and went straight to the fear centers of the brain. But Donghyun and his Marines did not run. They fired, moved, covered each other, advanced into the horror because that was what humans did. They walked into nightmares and came out the other side. Above Thalvorin, the battle turned. The Valkyrie had numbers, but humans had something the Coalition had forgotten. They had fury. They had purpose. They had 5 centuries of isolation that had taught them exactly how dangerous they could be. One by one, the insectoid ships fell. When the last Valkyrie vessel retreated into jump space, the Coalition fleet hung in shocked silence. They had been losing for 3 years, and humanity had won in 3 hours. Taesung received a transmission from the Coalition flagship. The alien commander's translator rendered his words in flat, emotionless English, but the shock was evident anyway. "What are you?" Taesung looked at Earth's direction, though it was too far away to see. He thought about the old stories, the legends that had survived 500 years. He thought about what humanity had been and what they had chosen to become. "We're what happens," he said, "when monsters decide to be heroes instead." Admiral Bora watched the battle reports with cold eyes. She stood in the command center on Earth, surrounded by screens showing the aftermath of Thalvorin. 30 human ships against 200 Valkyrie vessels. Victory in 3 hours, 0 human casualties. The Coalition was calling it a miracle. Bora knew better. It was not a miracle. It was what humanity had been designed by evolution to do. They were endurance hunters from a death world, and war was just another hunt. That was what scared her. "Admiral," said her aide, "the Coalition Council is requesting a formal meeting. They want to discuss integration of our forces with theirs." "Tell them I'll send Ambassador Yoonji," Bora said. "And tell her to be careful. They're going to ask questions she won't want to answer." On Thalvorin, Captain Taesung walked through the refugee camps that covered the planet's surface. The battle had saved millions, but the world itself was scarred. Valkyrie weapons had burned forests and boiled seas. It would take decades to heal. Around him, aliens of a dozen species stared. Some with gratitude, some with fear. He understood both reactions. Lieutenant HFY fell into step beside him. "The Coalition commanders want to meet with you. They're calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Taesung said. "I just did what needed doing." That's what heroes say. They found Dr. Jiwoo in a makeshift laboratory, studying samples taken from the Valkyrie ship that Donghyun's Marines had boarded. The specimens were dead, preserved in stasis, but even dead they looked wrong. "What have you found?" Tae-sung asked. Ji-woo did not look up from her microscope. "Something that should not exist. These creatures are not natural, Captain. They've been modified, enhanced. Someone built them to be weapons." "Built by who?" "I don't know yet. But look at this." She brought up a hologram showing the Valkyries' neural structure. "They have individual brains, but they're also connected to something larger. A hive mind, but not like bees or ants. This is more complex, more controlled." "You're saying something is commanding them?" "I'm saying these creatures are slaves." The meeting with the Coalition Council took place on the orbital station above Thalvoran. Ambassador Yoon-ji represented Earth, accompanied by Captain Tae-sung and an honor guard of Marines. Private Dong-hyun was among them, still processing what he had seen inside the Valkyrie ship. The council chamber was vast, designed to accommodate species of every size and shape. There were beings made of crystalline structures, others that floated in tanks of liquid, some that existed partially in dimensions humans could not perceive, and they all stared at the humans with a mixture of awe and fear. Commander Krita of the Avian Imperium spoke first. Her feathers ruffled with agitation. "We are grateful for your intervention at Thalvoran, but we must understand what we saw. Your tactics were..." She searched for the word, "disturbing." "Disturbing how?" Yoon-ji asked, her voice calm. "You fight without fear. Your pilots perform maneuvers that would kill our people from the acceleration alone. Your soldiers board enemy vessels without hesitation. You take risks that no rational being would accept." Krita leaned forward. "The old records said humans were dangerous. We thought it was exaggeration. We were wrong." Yoon-ji was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her words were careful. "Commander, may I tell you about Earth? Please. Our world has a gravity 20% higher than galactic standard. Our atmosphere has more oxygen, which makes fires burn hotter and faster. We have weather systems that can level cities. Earthquakes, volcanoes, predators that evolved alongside us, forcing us to become smarter, faster, more adaptable." She paused. "Every human alive is descended from survivors. We are not fearless. We are simply very, very good at being afraid and doing things anyway." A delegate made of living crystal chimed in. "But your violence, the way you fight, it is not like other species." "No," Tae-sung said, speaking for the first time. "It's not. Do you want to know why?" The council waited. "Because we fought ourselves. For thousands of years, the only enemy humanity had was humanity. We perfected warfare against opponents exactly as smart, as adaptable, as ruthless as we were. And then we learned what that cost us." His voice hardened. 500 years ago, we nearly destroyed ourselves in the contact wars. We killed millions because we were scared and angry. So we left. We isolated ourselves to learn control, to understand restraint. That's why we fight the way we do now. We know exactly how dangerous we are, and we choose carefully when to use it." The council chamber was silent. Then Dr. Ji-woo stepped forward. "If I may, I have information about the Valkyrie that you need to hear." She presented her findings to the council. The modifications, the hive mind, the evidence of control. As the delegates absorbed the implications, their agitation grew. "You're saying the swarm is being controlled?" Krita asked. "By something intelligent enough to modify organic life on a massive scale," Ji-woo confirmed. "Something that has been watching this war, studying how the coalition fights, adapting the Valkyrie to counter your tactics." "Then who? What species would do this?" "That's what we need to find out." The meeting ended with an agreement. Human forces would be integrated with coalition fleets, sharing intelligence and coordinating strategy. But there was tension underneath the cooperation. The coalition was grateful for human help, but they were also afraid of what humanity represented. That night, in the officers' quarters aboard the Indomitable, Tae-sung found Hai-wan staring out at the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Thinking," she said, "about what Commander Krita said, about us being disturbing. Does it bother you? Shouldn't it? We came here to help, and they're scared of us." Tae-sung joined her at the viewport. "Fear isn't always bad. Healthy fear keeps you alive. What matters is what you do with it. And what are we doing? Proving that being dangerous and being good are not opposites. Below them, on Thalvoran's surface, Specialist Kyung-soo worked in the medical tents. He was a combat medic, trained to keep Marines alive in impossible situations. But now he treated alien civilians, learning their biology on the fly, improvising solutions when standard procedures did not work. A young alien child, something like a six-legged deer, had been burned by Velkari weapons. Kyung-soo had never treated this species before. He did not know their chemistry, their tolerances, what would help and what would harm. But he tried anyway, because that was what medics did. Hours later, when the child stabilized, the parents approached him. They could not speak human languages, and he could not speak theirs. But gratitude needed no translation. They touched their foreheads to his hands, their version of a bow. Kyung-soo realized that this was why they had come. Not to be warriors, not to prove anything, but to do what they could for people who needed help. The coalition was right to fear humanity's capacity for violence, but they had not yet seen humanity's capacity for compassion. 3 days later, the alarms screamed. Long-range sensors detected a massive Velkari fleet entering coalition space. Not 200 ships this time, thousands, and they were heading directly for 3 core worlds simultaneously. Admiral Bora's voice came over every human ship's communication system. All vessels, this is Admiral Bora. The Coalition Command is requesting we consolidate our fleet to defend their primary worlds. I am denying that request. In the council chamber, delegates erupted in protest. We are splitting our forces, Bora continued, ignoring the chaos. 10 ships will defend each target world. This is not abandonment, this is tactics. Humans do not fight by standing together in one place. We fight by being everywhere the enemy is not expecting us. Commander Krita's voice cut through the protest. Admiral, this is suicide. 10 ships cannot hold against thousands. You're right, Bora said calmly. 10 coalition ships couldn't. But these aren't coalition ships. These are human vessels, with human crews, using human tactics. We've been fighting wars since before we had written language. Trust us, we know what we're doing. The fleet split as ordered. Captain Tae-sung took the Indomitable toward the manufacturing world of Kordesh. As they approached, he studied the planetary data, factories, refineries, industrial complexes covering 3 continents. Hae-won saw the look on his face. You have a plan. I have an idea. Whether it's a plan depends on if we survive. The Velkari arrived like a plague of locusts, thousands of organic ships blotting out the stars. 10 human vessels stood against them. And then Tae-sung gave the order that would become legend. Lieutenant Hae-won, take us into the atmosphere. We're going to teach them what it means to fight humans on ground we choose. The Indomitable, a warship, built for space combat, plunged into Kordesh's atmosphere. The other 9 human ships followed. The Velkari, confused but confident in their numbers, pursued. They flew into a trap 500 years in the making. Because humans had not spent their isolation idle. They had studied, they had learned. And they had remembered every lesson from every war they had ever fought. The industrial complexes became killing grounds. The refineries became bombs. The factories became mazes where human soldiers hunted alien invaders with the patience of predators who had evolved to track prey across continents. Private Dong-hyun led his Marines through the chaos, and for the first time he understood what Captain Tae-sung had meant. They were not fighting to kill. They were fighting to protect. And that made all the difference. The battle for Kordesh lasted 6 days. Captain Tae-sung had turned the entire planet into a weapon, and the Velkari bled for every meter they advanced. The industrial complexes that once built ships and tools now manufactured death. On the 3rd day, Private Dong-hyun's squad was pinned down in a collapsed refinery. The Velkari had learned to avoid the obvious traps, but they had not learned what made humans truly dangerous. It was not their weapons or their ships. It was their refusal to accept defeat. Sergeant, Dong-hyun called over the radio, I have an idea. Ideas get people killed, Private. So does sitting here waiting for them to flank us. The sergeant was quiet for a moment. What's your idea? Dong-hyun pointed to the massive fuel tanks above them. They were damaged, leaking volatile chemicals that the refineries used for processing ore. One spark and the whole structure would explode. You're insane, the sergeant said. I'm human, Dong-hyun replied. Same thing. They evacuated the position, falling back to a safe distance. Then Dong-hyun stayed behind, alone in the darkness, waiting. The Valkyrie came like a tide, hundreds of them pouring into the refinery, certain they had won. Dong-hyun fired a single shot into the fuel tanks. The explosion could be seen from orbit. When the flames cleared, the refinery was gone, along with 300 Valkyrie soldiers. Dong-hyun walked out of the smoke, his armor scorched but intact. The sergeant stared at him. How are you alive? I ran really fast, but it was more than that. Dong-hyun had calculated the blast radius, the collapse patterns, the exact route he needed to take. He had processed all of it in seconds under fire while scared out of his mind. That was what evolution on Earth had created. Brains that worked fastest when death was closest. Above the planet, Lieutenant Hae-won was flying the Indomitable through canyons that should have torn the ship apart. Valkyrie fighters pursued, but she knew something they did not. Every human pilot trained in atmospheres first, in gravity, where mistakes meant death. Flying in space was easier by comparison. She led the enemy ships into a narrow ravine, then suddenly went vertical, the Indomitable's engines screaming. The Valkyrie tried to follow. Half of them crashed into the canyon walls. The others broke off, finally learning to stop chasing human ships into enclosed spaces. Dr. Jiwoo watched all of this from her mobile laboratory. She had accompanied the ground forces, studying Valkyrie corpses recovered from the battlefield. With each examination, she grew more certain of her theory. Captain, she called over the command channel. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Tae-sung found her in a commandeered factory building surrounded by specimens and data screens. She looked exhausted but excited. I know what's controlling them, she said without preamble. Or rather, I know what it is. There's an organ in each Valkyrie, right where the brain connects to the spine. It's not native to their biology. It was implanted. An organ that does what? Receives commands. But not through sound or radio. Through something else. Psychic energy, for lack of a better word. She brought up a scan. And here's the interesting part. The organ is vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies. If we can generate the right pulse, we can disrupt the connection. Severing them from the hive mind? Exactly. But there's more. I've been analyzing the pattern of attacks. The Valkyrie aren't just trying to win. They're testing us, specifically testing humans. They adapt to coalition tactics within hours, but against us they keep trying the same approaches and failing. Tae-sung understood immediately. Because whoever is controlling them has never fought humans before. And they're fascinated by us. Captain, I think we're not just fighting a war, we're being evaluated. Before Tae-sung could respond, alarms blared across the command network. A new Valkyrie fleet had entered the system. But this one was different. The ships were larger, darker, covered in what looked like organic armor layered over metal. And at their center was something the sensors could barely register. What is that? Hae-won asked from the Indomitable's bridge. Energy readings are off the scale. The tactical officer reported. It's like nothing in the database. Wait, I'm getting a transmission. Audio only. It's speaking in English? A voice filled the bridge, and it was wrong. Too many tones at once, like 1,000 voices speaking in harmony. Humans of Terra. We are the Overlord caste. We have watched your species since you first reached the stars. We remember your violence, your chaos, your potential. You retreated into isolation and we thought you lost. But you have returned. This pleases us. Tae-sung took the communication. Who are you? Why are you attacking the coalition? We are teachers. We guide lesser species toward their purpose. The coalition has become soft, complacent. They needed pressure to evolve. You understand this, yes? Your own history shows that conflict drives advancement. Our history also shows that peace is harder to build than war, and more valuable. The Overlord's laughter was like breaking glass. Interesting. You have changed. We will study this. But first, we have a gift for you. Your isolation denied us the chance to properly test you 500 years ago. Let us correct this. The transmission ended, and the Valkyrie attacked with a fury they had not shown before. Colonel Jae-hwan received the emergency orders in the middle of a mission. His team, Ghost Company, was deep behind enemy lines on a moon at the edge of coalition space. They had been sabotaging Velkari supply routes when the message came. All Special Forces units, this is Admiral Bora. We've identified the source of the Velkari control, a breeding nexus on a dark planet designated Target Omega. Ghost Company, you're the closest unit. I need you to investigate and report. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. Jae-Hwan looked at his team. 12 operators, the best humanity had. They had trained together for years, trusted each other with their lives. Engineer Subin was checking her equipment, making sure every tool was ready. Commander Wu Jin was preparing the stealth ship Silent Arrow for the journey. You heard the Admiral, Jae-Hwan said. We're going to find out what we're really fighting. Target Omega was a nightmare. The planet orbited a dying star, perpetually shrouded in storms that blocked sensors and communications. The Silent Arrow slipped through the upper atmosphere, using technology that made it nearly invisible to detection. Nearly. Contact, Wu Jin reported. Multiple Velkari ships on intercept course. They shouldn't be able to see us. Unless the overlords told them where to look, Subin said. The planet's surface was worse than the approach. Massive organic structures covered the landscape, pulsing with bioluminescence. They looked like a cross between hives and factories, growing Velkari soldiers like crops. Ghost Company descended in powered armor, moving silently through the storm. They found the central nexus, a structure so large it was visible from orbit. Inside they discovered the truth. Thousands of Velkari in various stages of development suspended in fluid-filled chambers. But it was not the breeding that made Jae-Hwan's blood run cold. It was the other chambers, the ones containing members of coalition species. They were being studied, dissected, their biology analyzed and incorporated into new Velkari variants. They're not just building an army, Subin whispered. They're building the perfect weapon, taking the best traits from every species they encounter. Cameras up, Jae-Hwan ordered. Record everything. Command needs to see this. That was when the alarm started. Velkari poured from hidden passages, hundreds of them. Ghost Company fought their way toward the exit, but more kept coming. Engineer Subin realized they would not make it out conventionally. Colonel, she said, I can rig the Silent Arrow's reactor to explode. It'll take out the entire nexus, and us with it. Not if Commander Wu Jin flies like a human. Wu Jin understood immediately. Give me 60 seconds from ignition. I can do it. Subin ran toward the Silent Arrow while the rest of Ghost Company held the line. Specialist Kyung-Soo dragged wounded teammates to cover. His medical training pushed to the limit. Dong-Hyun, who had been attached to the mission as an observer, fought alongside veterans and proved he belonged there. Subin's fingers flew over the reactor controls, bypassing safety system after safety system. She was essentially building a nuclear bomb, and she had less than 5 minutes to do it. 60 seconds starting now, she called. Ghost Company sprinted for the ship. The Velkari followed. Wu Jin fired up the engines before everyone was aboard, the Silent Arrow lifting off while Marines dove through the closing hatch. The explosion lit up the planet's dark side like a second sun. The entire nexus vanished in nuclear fire, along with thousands of Velkari and the infrastructure that had been producing them. But the blast caught the Silent Arrow, sending it tumbling through the atmosphere. Wu Jin fought the controls, trying to stabilize. But the ship was never designed for atmospheric flight at the best of times, let alone while damaged and on fire. They crashed on the planet's far side, the impact crushing the front section of the ship. When the emergency lights flickered on, Jae-Hwan assessed the damage. Head count, he called. Everyone reported in, but Jae-Hwan himself did not respond. Kyung-Soo found him trapped under a collapsed bulkhead, his right arm crushed beyond saving. Colonel, don't move. I need to stabilize you before— Cut it off, Jae-Hwan said through gritted teeth. We don't have time for anything else. The rescue of Ghost Company took 3 days. 3 days of holding a crashed ship against endless waves of Velkari. 3 days of rationing ammunition and hope in equal measure. When the Indomitable finally broke through the planet's storms, Colonel Jae-Hwan had lost his arm, but none of his soldiers. In the medical bay, Specialist Kyung-Soo fitted Jae-Hwan with a temporary prosthetic. The colonel flexed the mechanical fingers, testing the neural interface. It'll do, he said.
How long until I can return to duty?
Sir, you lost an arm yesterday, and the war didn't stop because of it. How long? Kyung-Soo sighed. This was what made humans dangerous. Not their weapons or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to accept limitations. 2 days minimum. But Colonel, you need rest. The trauma. The trauma can wait until after we win. Captain Taesung found them in the medical bay. He dismissed Kyung-soo with a nod, then sat across from Jae-hwan. You did good work on Target Omega, Taesung said. The data you recovered changes everything. We know what we're fighting now, do we? Jae-hwan asked. Because I saw what they're building in those breeding nexuses. They're creating monsters using the best traits from every species. Felkari with coalition armor plating, with human endurance, with avian reaction speeds. What happens when they perfect that? Then we make sure they never get the chance. Back on Earth, Agent Mi-sun worked in the archives deep beneath the capital. She was intelligence, one of the few people authorized to access the sealed records from the contact wars. Admiral Bo-Ra had given her a mission: find out everything about humanity's first contact with aliens, and find out why it went so wrong. The official story was simple. 500 years ago, humans encountered alien ships near Nexus Gate, a space station at the edge of Sol system. Miscommunication led to violence. The aliens called for help, and suddenly humanity was at war with half the galaxy. After years of brutal combat, Earth surrendered and isolated itself. But Mi-sun had access to classified files, to personal logs from commanders who had been there. And the more she read, the more the story stopped making sense. The first contact team had been scientists, not soldiers. They had protocols for peaceful first contact. The ship that approached Nexus Gate had been unarmed, broadcasting messages of peace in every language humanity knew. And then, according to the official records, they opened fire without warning. But one log told a different story. It was from the station commander, a man named General Hyunwoo. His final entry before the shooting started was strange. The crew is acting paranoid, seeing threats that aren't there. Something is wrong. It's like fear itself has become contagious. Mi-sun dug deeper. She found medical reports from survivors describing auditory hallucinations, intense paranoia, shared delusions, symptoms that appeared suddenly and vanished just as quickly after the violence began. And then she found the analysis that had been classified and buried. A xenopsychologist had examined the evidence and concluded, external psionic influence highly probable. The contact war was triggered by deliberate mental manipulation. Mi-sun brought her findings to Admiral Bo-Ra immediately. You're saying someone made us start the war? Bo-Ra asked, her voice carefully controlled. I'm saying the contact wars weren't entirely our fault. Someone was there, someone who could affect human minds, and they wanted us to fight. Mi-sun hesitated. Admiral, the psychological profile matches what we're seeing from the Overlord cast. They manipulate species into conflict to study them. Bo-Ra was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was harder than steel. Find me General Hyunwoo. I don't care if he's retired, if he's on the other side of Earth, or if he's in a meditation retreat. Find him and bring him to me. He's the only person alive who was at Nexus Gate. General Hyunwoo was 78 years old and living in a monastery in the mountains. He had not spoken about the contact wars in 50 years. When Agent Mi-sun arrived with soldiers to escort him to the capital, he simply nodded. I've been waiting for this, he said. I knew someday the truth would matter again. In the command center, Admiral Bo-Ra, General Hyunwoo, and Captain Taesung met in a secure room. The old general looked at the tactical display showing the current war, and his hands shook slightly. It's happening again, he whispered. General, Bo-Ra said, tell us what really happened at Nexus Gate. Hyunwoo's story came slowly, painfully, like removing an old wound. He described the first contact, the excitement of meeting another intelligent species. Then he described the change. It started with whispers, not real sounds, but thoughts that felt like someone else's voice. Fear thoughts. Danger thoughts. The aliens are lying. They're going to attack. They're a threat. It spread through the crew like a virus. Within hours, everyone was convinced we were about to be destroyed. And then someone fired, Taesung said. I gave the order. Hyunwoo's voice broke. I saw threats that weren't there. I convinced myself it was self-defense. And by the time the fear cleared, millions were dead and Earth was at war. He looked at Bo-Ra. The guilt sent me to the monastery, but I always suspected something had been done to us. We weren't that paranoid, that violent, not naturally. Something made us that way. The Overlord cast, Mi-sun said, laying out her evidence. They were studying humanity even back then. They triggered the contact wars to see how we'd fight. And when we went into isolation instead of conquering the galaxy, they moved on to other experiments. Bo-Ra concluded. She stood, pacing. 500 years. We punished ourselves for 500 years for a crime we were manipulated into committing. The guilt still matters, Hyunwoo said quietly. We still killed. We still chose violence even if someone was pushing us toward it. The isolation taught us control, restraint, discipline. We needed those lessons. Taesung leaned forward. General, you mentioned Nexus Gate. Where exactly is it? At the edge of the Sol system. We left it abandoned after the war. It's just floating in space now, a monument to our shame. Or a place the overlords might return to, Taesung said. If they were there during first contact, they might have left something behind. Evidence, technology, maybe a way to find them. Admiral Bo-Ra was already pulling up star charts. Captain, take a reconnaissance team to Nexus Gate, but be careful. If the overlords are watching us, they'll know it's significant. Lieutenant Haewon piloted a small fast ship toward Nexus Gate, accompanied by Captain Taesung, Dr. Jiwoo, and a squad of Marines led by Sergeant Dong-hyun. The station appeared on sensors after 3 days of travel, a dead structure tumbling through the void. It looked worse than Taesung had imagined. Battle damage covered every surface. 500 years of micrometeorite impacts, frozen atmosphere venting from hull breaches. This was where humanity's greatest shame had occurred. Atmosphere is gone, Haewon reported. We'll need suits for boarding. They docked with the main airlock and entered the ghost station. Inside, everything was frozen, preserved by vacuum and time. Dried blood on the walls, bodies still floating in corridors. Both human and alien locked in death forever. Dr. Jiwoo scanned everything with her equipment. I'm picking up residual energy signatures. Very faint, but definitely not natural. Something was here that used psionic energy. They moved deeper into the station, toward the command center where General Hyunwoo had given the order to fire, and there, in the heart of the station, they found it. The device was small, almost organic in appearance, attached to the station's power grid like a parasite. It pulsed with a faint purple light, still active after 5 centuries. What is it? Dong-hyun asked. An amplifier, Jiwoo said, her scanner readings confirming her worst fears. It takes psionic energy and broadcasts it. This is what made the crew paranoid. This is what started the war. Taesung approached the device carefully. As he got closer, he felt it. A pressure in his mind trying to push thoughts that weren't his own. Fear, anger, paranoia. But 500 years of humanity's isolation had taught them mental discipline. Taesung recognized the foreign thoughts for what they were and pushed them aside. It's still active, he said. Still trying to manipulate anyone who gets close. Then the overlords might still be using it, Jiwoo said. Monitoring it. Which means the alarms on their suits blared simultaneously. Haewon's voice came over the radio from the ship. Captain, we have contacts. Multiple Velkari vessels dropping out of jump space. They're surrounding the station. Taesung made a decision instantly. Jiwoo, download everything you can from that device. Everyone else, back to the ship. We're about to have company, but they were not fast enough. The Velkari had learned from previous encounters. Instead of attacking the ship, they boarded the station, cutting off the team's escape route. Sergeant Dong-hyun and his Marines formed a defensive line in the corridor, but these Velkari were different. They moved with more intelligence, coordinated in ways that suggested individual thought rather than hive mind control. And then a voice filled their helmets. The same multi-toned speech of the Overlord caste, Captain Taesung of Terra. We meet at last, in the place where your species' story could have ended. How poetic. Show yourself, Taesung demanded. The Velkari parted and something else entered the corridor. It was vaguely humanoid but wrong in every proportion. Too tall, too thin, with skin that seemed to shift between states of matter. The combined fleet gathered at the edge of the abyssal sector. Every human ship, every coalition vessel that could still fight assembled for the final battle. It was the largest military force the galaxy had seen in centuries. Admiral Bo-Ra stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Eternal, watching the fleet organize itself. Beside her, General Hyunwoo observed in silence. She had brought him along, the last living witness to where it all began. 500 years, Hyunwoo said quietly. It's taken us 500 years to come back and finish this. No, Bo-Ra corrected. It's taken us 500 years to become the people who could finish this properly. There's a difference. Ambassador Yoonji addressed the Coalition Council one final time before the assault. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species. all watching the human diplomat with a mixture of hope and fear. 5 centuries ago, Yunji said, humanity made a terrible mistake. We let fear guide us and millions died. We isolated ourselves because we understood what we were capable of and it terrified us. But isolation taught us something the Overlord caste could never understand. It taught us that true strength is not the capacity for violence, but the wisdom to know when violence is necessary and when it is not. She paused, looking at each delegate. Today we fight not because we are violent, but because we choose to protect. We fight not because we are fearless, but because we care enough to be brave despite our fear. And we fight not alone, but together, human and coalition, as equals. The council voted unanimously to proceed. For the first time in galactic history, all species would fight together, and they would do it under human command. The Overlord's stronghold was a space station the size of a small moon, hidden in the radiation fields of the galactic core. It was ancient, older than any of the coalition species, built from materials that should not exist. Around it orbited thousands of Velkari vessels, a final defense for the beings who had manipulated the galaxy for millennia. Captain Tae-sung led the first wave in the Indomitable. Lieutenant Hae-won at the helm, flying with the precision that came from 500 years of humanity preparing for exactly this moment. The Velkari attacked in coordinated swarms, but the coalition fleet had learned from the humans. They did not hold formation rigidly. They adapted, moved, created chaos in the enemy ranks, and the human ships danced through it all, drawing fire, protecting the slower coalition vessels, fighting with a controlled fury that the galaxy had called legendary. Sergeant Dong Hyun led the Marine boarding teams. His target was one of the coalition ships that had fallen under psionic control earlier in the battle. Instead of destroying it, human Marines boarded and fought to reclaim it without killing the mind-controlled crew. It was difficult, dangerous work. The controlled coalition soldiers fought with desperate strength, but Dong Hyun's team used non-lethal weapons, stunning and restraining rather than killing. Because that was the difference. That was what 500 years had taught them. When the ship was secured and the crew recovered, they rejoined the fight on humanity's side. Word spread through the fleet. Humans were not just warriors. They were protectors who would risk their own lives to save even those who fought against them. Colonel Jae-hwan led Ghost Company in the assault on the station itself. His new prosthetic arm moved with mechanical precision as he coordinated the teams. Engineer Subin had developed psionic dampeners based on Dr. Ji-woo's research, and every Marine carried one. The dampeners worked, shielding the humans from mental manipulation. But as they penetrated deeper into the station, the pressure increased. The Overlords were not just defending with Velkari. They were using their own psionic power, trying to overwhelm the shields to break into human minds. Specialist Kyung-soo felt it first. The whispers, just like what General Hyunwoo had described from the First Contact War. Fear thoughts, paranoia. But Kyung-soo had spent his entire life learning discipline, learning to recognize his own thoughts from intrusive ones. "It's in our heads," he called out. "Everyone focus. Remember your training. These thoughts are not yours." Ghost Company pushed forward, fighting both the Velkari and the psionic assault. Some Marines fell, their dampeners failing under the concentrated power, but others stayed strong, carrying their fallen comrades, refusing to leave anyone behind. They reached the central chamber where the Overlords waited. 3 beings of terrible power, ancient beyond measure, surrounded by psionic energy that distorted reality itself. Overlord Krath was there along with 2 others. "Humans," Krath said, his voice resonating through both air and mind. "You have come far. But this is where your story ends. We are the shepherds of the galaxy. We create conflict to drive evolution. Without us, species stagnate. You should thank us for making you strong." Colonel Jae-hwan raised his weapon. "You didn't make us strong. You made us desperate. There's a difference. And yet you are here fighting, proving our methods work. Join us. Together we could guide the galaxy to heights never imagined." "We don't want to guide the galaxy." Admiral Bora's voice came over the communication system. She had joined the boarding team, unwilling to watch from safety while others fought. "We want it to be free. Free from manipulation. Free from orchestrated wars. Free from creatures who think they have the right to decide how others should live." The Overlords attacked. The psionic assault was overwhelming. A tidal wave of mental force that should have crushed every human mind. The dampeners shattered like glass. Across the fleet, soldiers collapsed as the overlords reached into their thoughts. But something unexpected happened. 500 years of mental discipline, of meditation, of understanding their own capacity for violence and choosing restraint. It had changed humanity on a fundamental level. When the psionic assault hit, humans did not break. They bent, recognized the foreign thoughts, and pushed back, not with technology, not with weapons, but with sheer will. Dr. Jiwoo, still aboard the Indomitable, understood what was happening. Captain, the overlords are psychic parasites. They've never faced prey that fought back mentally. We need to overwhelm them with thoughts they can't process. What kind of thoughts? Taesung asked. Hope, unity, defiance, everything they don't understand. Taesung opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, all personnel. I need you to think. Think about why we're here. Think about the people we're protecting. Think about the future we're building. And project those thoughts as loudly as you can. It sounded impossible. It sounded like something from ancient myths. But humans had evolved as social creatures, as cooperative hunters who could communicate with nothing but looks and gestures. Their brains were designed for shared experience. Across the fleet, thousands of humans began to project. They thought about Earth, about home. They thought about the coalition species they had fought alongside, about friendships forged in battle. They thought about the children who would grow up in peace if they won today. They thought about second chances and redemption, and choosing to be better than their worst impulses. The psychic noise was overwhelming. The overlords, who had spent millennia feeding on fear and pain, suddenly found themselves drowning in hope and determination. They had never encountered anything like it. Overlord Krath screamed. What are you? How can you do this? We're human, Admiral Bora said simply. And we're done being afraid. Commander Woojin's Silent Arrow, the ship that had survived Target Omega, made its final approach to the station's core. Engineer Subin had modified the ship's main weapon, turning it into a psionic disruptor using everything they had learned. Firing, Woojin said calmly. The weapon activated, not destroying but disrupting, breaking the psionic connections that the overlords used to control the Velkari, that they used to manipulate minds, that they used to feed on suffering. The three overlords shrieked as their power collapsed. Without their psionic abilities, they were revealed for what they truly were: ancient, fragile creatures who had hidden behind mental manipulation for so long, they had forgotten how to exist without it. Across the galaxy, the Velkari swarm stopped fighting, the hive-mind connection severed, and millions of insectoid soldiers suddenly found themselves with individual thoughts for the first time. Some fled, some collapsed, some simply stopped, confused by their own consciousness. The battle ended not with a dramatic explosion, but with silence. The kind of silence that comes when a war that had consumed the galaxy for 3 years suddenly stops. In the Overlord chamber, the three ancient beings lay dying. Their bodies were failing, unable to survive without the psionic energy they had stolen from others. Admiral Bora stood over them, and for a moment, she considered letting them die in pain, alone, terrified. It would be justice for the millions they had killed, the wars they had started, the contact war that had shaped humanity's guilt for 5 centuries. But then she thought about what 500 years of isolation had taught her people. Vengeance was easy. Mercy was harder and more valuable. Specialist Kyung-soo, she called. See if you can stabilize them. They need to stand trial for their crimes, not die here in the dark. The young medic stared at her. Admiral, after everything they've done, we are going to prove that humanity is better than they believed possible.